Hey y'all, does this start at 50 or 55? Do
I
you know?
think 50.
Okay. Is everyone there? The judges here?
We also don't have all the judges, so
Okay. Well, then it starts at 52 or 53. We'll see whenever. Okay, it looks like Nate just jumped in. I will send the one AC out. Okay. Is anyone not ready?
yeah, we don't have the 1AC.
Okay. Just give me a thumbs up when you're all counted and everything. Okay. Perfect. Anyone not ready now? All right, I'm gonna start in about 5 seconds unless someone stops me verbally. Supply advantage. Supply is more volatile than other drivers. Team meets 3029. These shipping costs worldwide skyrocket. Dramatic increase, having a consistent impact on inflation. Pass through the inflation less impact on fuel. Food prices. Shipping costs are much more volatile. Contribution to inflation and quantitatively similar to variation generated by shocks in global oil and food prices. The rush is a blip. Bocat 330. If everyone is a globalization, characterized as inevitably a warning of unraveling guide the same era. Russia finds it difficult to thrive through an independent global economy. So the way through fractionalization, Russia's accelerated exception. The Soviet bloc was closed after the rest is tightly integrated in the globalization. Not just our Turkey from the 20s and 30s when the trade collapse rates will double and collapse the economy. That's Miller 330. The supply chain is still chaotic. We don't think it's going to get better at all. There's still a lot of time, a lot of money left. You'd be caught up at the end of the year. Harper ocean rates still even doubling. Even like nice comparison is everyone big short us. Risk is that higher cost and increase container shipping for pass along to the consumers. Worse strokes, high inflation, consumers curb sentiment, goods buying. The sellers don't want anything to see. Understands what's coming. The business is going to make less. They're going to raise the prices. Don't think anyone understands how high prices are going to go. It's run by the customers, growing and driven by consolidation, removing immunity solved, but regs can't. Bloomberg 22 shipping still elevated 22. Small customer paying for more for everything. Contracts running 200% higher than a year ago. Large customers negotiate better terms. Small importers pass along the cost of nothing done on the risk. Inflation and food security go over highest carriers, falling profits, nine-fold jump out transport prices, cloud recovery being the long-term future of the economy. Just 10 lines control 85% capacity. Lines lock in capacity. Translated latest measure pricing power. Statutory edges exemption to DIRS. FMC laws to authority. FMC increased monitoring under current law. There's little regulation due to prevent widespread abuse impossible with the FMC to challenge alliances for violating competition requirements. Don't have the fuels necessary ability to give the FMC great authority, even if that once the old generation set up the firm shuts. Short of advantage, just immediate fuels inflation and crashes the global economy. Route 21. The global shipping crisis, fuel inflation 23. Shipping exacerbate global inflation. Higher cost of not transfer shipping is much bigger than ever could be limited. Lifted prices, high freight rates threatening global recovery. Boosting importing consumer prices. Impact trickles out. 10% rise in container ship rates. Cuts production by more than 1%. The old buffers are spent. Inflation causes collapse. Rally 21. The global inflation surge is still economic collapse. Times different. Inflation surge comes from real estate assets value boosted a record of unsustainable levels. That was not the case during great computer inflation because of supply chains at absolute levels. It's the very fact of inflation turns the fact that debt restrictions undermines markets. Accelerating growth is key to outrun technological black walls. involves caps numerous existential hazards. Ash Benner, 20. Those concerned about the future want to spend an existential catastrophe because it occurs with the limits of non-market ability from past rising chances lead to public to averting catastrophe leads to hazards of decline. Having growth would freeze the rate would lead to catastrophe growth and public reduce the risk of humanity. A period would take catastrophe may be bigger and more advanced enough to create a destruction, not to decrease consolidation. Means cyber attacks crash global trade market 18 integration cause huge leverage for cyber attacks painfully evident. No petty has been shutting down the operating systems cause major delays. At least 17 terminals had 20% drop in volume higher. Costs are rebuilding IT infrastructure, global coverage, for horizontal and vertical integration for the facility, not going to affect companies that come to IT, business backgrounds simultaneously, supply chains high. Interconnected results in insecure operating environments, utilization of common assets, shipping backbone of the international trading ports is vital to every country's infrastructure. Major disruptions in supply chains have impacts in the overall economy. Cyber global risk for global trade. Ships are vulnerable. Grade D20D. Maritime industries increasing vulnerable for cyber market, financial markets affect ship operations, cargo and onshore facilities. And if you think about ship before, hackers, pirates, criminals, and terrorists, and non-hostile nation states, doesn't matter who the bad guy is in hacking the vessel domain facilities. All those are connected, kills billions, and causes LNG city attacks on par with nukes in Kai. 21. If the maritime industry suddenly leaves the spirit for battlefield, medicine would stop aliens and stuff. As the only faction there's various factors for hackers to control the damage. Critical infrastructure shot up by 400% of the hacker control the tanker to do something wrong with LDs. As tankers small damage cause explosion in the scale of the nuclear bomb. Removing the exemption solves immunity structurally, ensures price hikes. Munoz 314 alliances. Lot carriers build capacity disadvantage small competitors, and then with capacity during COVID increased profits. Having alliances suffered rates no longer not with alliances over capacity. Carriers targeting the new alliances to manage over capacity to be efficient. If incentives were backwards, logic carriers need interest exemption to live large vessels that have to be unhealthy. The markets become smaller. Carriers reduce too big to fail risks given shipping joining exemptions for 40 years. Impossible to prove any alliance to travel the cost and only certainly improve quality DOJ enforcement now and coming, but it fails because of the immunity solar 3-1 DOJ's interest division is not going to help the FMC enforce the shipping act. FMC is the finalist of 118 employees, less than 30 million. So people agriculture is better information on shipping than FMC. FMC is the litigation enforcement expect more government security likely the DOJ use shipping act to go directly at 3 cartels. Not the first time DOJ managed shipping and shipping executives drop the investigation because the industry has an interest in community work together to shared routes. DOJ cannot get around that, and ocean carriers are supposed to coordinate price most. The industry assume they do. FMC is culturally timid. Shippers won't seek out because they perceive ineptitude. Round 22. By the TOTAN's vulnerability, it was visible. Commission's response and issue considerations alarming. The regulatory related chief function commission decided to serve as catalyst for stakeholder solutions responses and emphasize commercial solutions. Commission delivered to avoid stepping on issues for whatever parties to give fear retaliation, prohibitive cost negative continuing lines tag grip on the industry advantage. 2 is ports defer co-beneficial investments because the sunk cost of given alliances greater bargaining power over ports. Uncertainty makes hold up worse. That's Merck 18 to the public money to spend on port infrastructure well documented challenge providing the capacity to hold up problems. Increased bargaining power of carriers amplified by shipping alliances. Only 2 ports seem large containers depend on 1 or 2 alliances to revise the port networks. Larger factor ports leaving the hold up problem when the 2 countries benefit from cooperation, but they're from fear of increased bargaining power will reduce profits as pertinent infrastructure investment from A makes investment B derives as investment B continues rules after investment to expect the investor risk of hold ups higher in the cases of uncertainty. Alliance leverage prioritizes handling cost reduction overall else that causes infrastructure under investment and inefficiencies. Barnard 16 private port companies facing big challenges. Alliances driven down handling costs expected operators to invest in equipment and perceptual for drive handling costs led to underinvestment in infrastructure costs to lead to price growth aggregates impact the market and equities and reveals necessity of targeting better investments to connections of the improved coordination. The private operators want to invest in clear stable framework including real protection for competition. Private investment will be postponed. It also forces equipment manufacturers to recycle legacy models, crowding out independent owners that enhance sustainable development. PT16 alliances change the speed of tech innovation and equipment and manufacturing need to be comparable with the alliance pushing more pounds of tech with independent owners with an eye on sustainable development efficiency innovation perceived as an even pace of alliances on speed for shape of infrastructure port infrastructure stop distinction with Tomos at 19. The majority of heavily related on necessities given population growth and increasing strength and correlation between logistics supply chain and human survival adaptable climate adaptations adopting port resilience increases incorporates sustainability and infrastructure development. Sustainability reduces financial costs from vulnerability solves growing climate risk SDGs local renewables and sea rise Asteros 21. The seaports and mine GCD as key to the states giving climate damages disruptions delays in import for global economy key to SIDs and development of ports as lifelines critical assets are growing high levels of climate heavily impacted sea level sources extreme wave disruptions being sensitive particularly in regions affected by tropical cyclones storms surface wave. Despite emissions dip in the world is heading excess 3 degrees no time to lose. The severe compromise sustainable development climate resilience and ports are critical to the 2030 agenda for sustainable goals. Paris says finance technology capacity building energy efficiency decarbonization renewables provide major co-benefits. Resilience building reports increasingly recognized SDG stop extinction UNSC 17 development of best center for all forms of nuclear weapons. There's threat multiplier conflicts have been linked to terror development and best investments prevention sustainable development civil societies without it parties taking possible positions and drive conflict possible in return to root causes of splitting conflict include under development local renewables solve nuclear war sea rise irradiates the ocean extinction war WFC 16 harnessing local renewables increasing political and energy independence is catalyst for cooperation tackling under transnational security including global crises that avoid future armed conflicts builds cooperative security mechanisms regional initiatives can tackle nuclear tensions rising sea levels create a catastrophic convergence rising sea radioactive waste on islands and the oceans which are not going to sea threats drift towards the similar fate OSTRA thumps and increases enforcement Grizzlies 4-1. Bipartisan legislation attackers, supply chain woes, inching closer to Biden's debt goes, bringing the passed in the Senate, approving the House late last year as the consumption of probes and carries Britain's presidency to apply. Enforcement actions, Biden calls out the carry exemptions race towards the state union version passed 364 to 60. DOJ, criminal enforcement at a 30-year high and growing. J38 dagger powers later the chicken finger of justice enforcement, the open grand jury investigation for the time in the last 30 years, state based in years beyond her powers related to better plan deterrence and executive jail labor enforcement thumbs in that 317 on March 10th, the DOJ entered an MOU with the OLD, collusive behavior and labor and application private of DOJ MOU as an error of DOJ's enforcement equivalent and increased scrutiny on conduct can provides reversal significantly to increased prosecution by DOJ and anti-conduct labor calls DOJ trained the OLD. OJ's commitment to investigating prosecution plan. The United States federal government has substantially increased its prohibitions on anti-competitive conduct by private vessel operating common carriers by reducing its shipping antitrust immunity solvency. The plan aligns with international preferences. Other exemption removals disprove concerns were early attained. Antitrust exemptions no longer legitimately echoed the national security repeal exemption. The price volatility comes from structure and stability of market participation, conference participation, stable trade, Congress in the exemption dramatic industries that remove exemption for antitrust exemptions, curtail, eliminate competition, increase the operative horribles in the industry, regulate cartels with the rest of us, world to high prices, lower price companies over invest capacity and percent of innovative deviation among Japan, EU, and US. Various not affected by EU's exemption. The price fixing prevents shared rates and most efficient. DOJ shares and tells and coordinates with the country's coalition 223. The claim of global forward ship organizations about anti-competitive behavior so allow the private authorities of the including DOJ established working groups sharing intelligence with the immunity left 3 alliances and all company justice collaborations among governments is positive to achieve and oversee foreign owned shipping lines. DOJ's established Sherman working groups and amnesty corps is the most effective tool. Paid 15 focuses divisions efforts to antitrust cartels. The Sherman fine of $100 billion to increase the individual deterrence legislation, increase the incentives to blow the whistle on the cartel's relationship with the government to investigate and prosecute justice has more than 50 MLATs and other anti-cartels and workshops to share with the actions successful cooperation for foreign efforts is essential for obtaining of evidence from foreign locations that lines of coordination enforcement and premature disclosure destruction of evidence detection coordination convergence and enhanced enforcement for head rates antitrust business amnesty policy the cornerstone cartel enforcement led to detection prosecution of international cartel search warrants monitoring other combining other cooperation of insiders the best way to crack the cartel. Mark Pate at cartel did not read Beheson. Did you send the plan out, Michael?
Let me just make sure we got the plan. Okay, you good for cross-checks?
Yep.
I want to ask about the plan. You say reduce its shipping antitrust immunity. Does that mean the plan removes the shipping exemption?
Yeah, the plan reduces the application of the shipping exemption. It likely, as per our solvency advocates, results in the removal of the exemption, but not for the purposes of counterplan competition.
Sure. So, but like normal means for the plan, it applies antitrust to vessel operating common carriers, says the immunity does not apply to them.
Yes, normal means likely results in that as per our solvency advocates.
Why is reducing shipping consolidation critical to avert an economic collapse?
Yeah, that's the entirety of the first advantage.
Right, but like, why is consolidation the critical internal link there? Like, what are the anti-competitive practices driving you're saying drive inflation now?
So there's a couple. One of them is that there's cartels now that are doing price hikes that results in mass increases in the prices of shipping globally. Second is that there's a lack of reliability. They're doing things that basically there's not enough competition, and so there's no like reason for them to come and say, hey, we'll fulfill these orders, etc. It's reducing reliability across the supply chains. 80% of California's food orders that were supposed to be sent out in October didn't get sent out. It's a good example of that. Another
so
thing is monopsony power. The ports advantage talks about how they're increasing and they're doing. There's 2 things. One is that they're switching between overcapacity and undercapacity to create barriers to entry. And the fourth thing, like
internal links to the economy, price hikes, supply chain disruptions, labor monopsony power.
Monopsony, as well as the overcapacity, strategic overcapacity.
I have more questions about advantage too.
As well. Yeah.
Why does more sustainable port infrastructure get governments to commit to sustainable development goals?
Yeah, so it's not necessarily just about sustainable development goals. It says that that's somewhat
an impact about SDGs.
Yeah, it says that the sustainable development goals are inevitable and they're on the path to them in the status quo. The difference is that they will not be effective absent port investments. And the evidence indicates that the port investments will help to allow for these development goals to be possible because it allows for
which governments have committed to SDGs now?
The ports. So the evidence says that the ports will be innovative and will help to protect against the downsides of climate risk.
Does this evidence say ports?
But the second but the second part of it is it says that it'll increase the ability for trade to result in these things that
I have a question about the renewables internal link on advantage too. Your card says investment in energy efficiency, decarbonization, renewables may provide major co-benefits. That's where your card mentions renewables. What does the plan do to incentivize investment in renewables?
Yeah, so the plan helps to incentivize investment in renewables by allowing for sustainable supply chains. And the other card that we read on this, Mark, if you is
I can.
Yeah.
So really what it is right now is that the consolidation argument says that the ports don't have any capacity or finance capability to invest in anything for certainty because they're not sure about the sustainability of their supply chains, which means that they have incentives to do more innovation after that.
But we'll
says that trade is a crucial internal link, and that
we'll
the
send out
supply
the
chain
one and
will.
see.
Should be sent. The order is 5 off, and then bench 1, bench 2. Everyone good to go?
I don't have it yet.
Not yet.
Good now?
We're good.
Sweet.
CIL categorized the United States government should potentially increase permission of any company conduct by private vessel operating common shares by expanding scope of the term obligation under customary international law. Companies it solves it renders the same conduct equally unlawful will expand CIL rather than interest section banks will standards interest CIL and interest countries understanding competition either possesses the standard like I love competition is to be recognized by the U.S. standard of law competition standard universal going accept the separate I love for interest supply country that do not recognize that are some of the other what is necessary which truly principles of competition law U.S. commitment for the disintegration of international economic extension of Career 20 I open important rules towards the Lord with the secrets of economic governance of challenges environment degradation equality office national integration gaining attraction of the state opposition to security facility democracy sustainability bureau the shift the word unfettered sovereignty as a paradigm of international network expression a liberal universal use separation standard with the highlights and solidarity between borders and national orders keep our central circles the grand shadow of the United States century increase domestic shipbuilding capacity investment in commercial naval industry pride a more security grant program the highest amounts for large scale security ways of hardening criminal maritime infrastructure supply fully fund and staffing for the CBP and port staff port security grant program solve cyber resilience counter a 22 another maritime cyber security maritime transportation needs research on the right system port security grant program PhD the PhD is made by which support large scale security upgrades high level ensure the course of the rain, simply the PhD award solves the and COVID labor shortages and all cause 142 million around transportation has been a news with the global pandemic close vulnerability shortages could be offers the question one probably pandemic and another layer of complexity to be asked how to police fund the police staff to ensure every workforce is efficient cargo movement the sunset Canada and United States Congress should impose a general sunset on shipping and distributed after 5 years index within 4 years and 9 months prior to date order the GAO to report on the consuming need for shipping and distributed require the Senate and how should ensure committee to hold hearings on the acceptance of the GAO funds is continued access is awarded for the Congress for new last time for the president shall be accepted to be renewed solves the advocates never to any solution to review the chapter to fall from one for where accepted random books one where statutory exemptions for duty time list Congress will place on master Congress establishing the person on accepted after 5 years order the GAO to report on the accepted committee holding hearing the accepted GAO funds award to the committee's fine the exemption should be renewed they forward law over President, conduct the certificate should be allowed to allow you to think about this information, recommend whether or not to renew report be submitted to your committees and committee find the exemption to be renewed must forward a position over and set the exemption to be voted on reform laws non-partisan examine and make a recommendation to definitely replace the burden of support demonstrated to the GAO and Congress by the exemption until necessary would have made a full committee hearings on the case of exemption for renewal reform limits less controversial irrelevant exception the plan crushes the rule of law and democracy approach the category revives it lack of congressional reviews non-transparent unaccountable and technocratic quality on GDPs and it's political sales connected with political value shifting with technology interests democratic democracy never possible because unaccountable reducing democracy never can move the needle back to policy the revenue general should equalize interest will be better reach democracy each better progressive child care the interest loss themselves key to broader participation democracy legitimacy first and wall on 13 reducing democracy and the history side can be done positions allow percent of participation to follow or greater efforts to make it transparent responsibility legitimacy three cannot be sure by technical method compare to democratic student answers with too far from democratic student with the new black the democratic vision of government self extinction in 20 competitors into the war the human life is not worth anything to the moves second minute this ship nuclear war catastrophe deterioration democracy the only hope of extra credit with extinction of democracy with the gauge formation developing as figure of new reaction to national goals still CCG voted strong in democracy overbound and hungry the consent agrees counterpoint the United States Commission bring interest action against independent conduct by private that's operating common errors with the standing to settle the consent agrees to be solved Congress then Tribunal 22 after the road with interest the interest violation of the consent agrees litigation result of former version the alternative settlement and fix the negative effect when negotiation commitment flow with minister of cost combination down identify the first paper finds to be no wrongdoing for the interest cases not formally sanctioned violation 70% of the abuse of knowledge case or resolve of the commitments turns all deficits to all DAs right and Ginsburg 18 along cases resolve cases more completely out of some litigation long cause the uncertain consent agreed a good solution to litigation highly dynamic uncertain litigation burden businesses may lead to allocate substantial resources replacing agency action equal to the judgment that no interest violation occurred this is quickly dispute unless the business needs to spend on the corrections but it gets over 18 every single agency and for goals signals can happen to the prevailing logic and the works of the agency. The court clock DA further course of managing caseloads out to network 12 15 there's not increase 5% that would be larger courts on what happened the several times related back not could the other courts will the judges have returned increase 7 courts to the intimate courts as with the cost of delay interest cases research tended and intersect with other domains of law specifically disposal of patent litigation warrant 50 interest on both large or history expense cost litigation is also the vast evidence for a claim of the judges have to the variety of evidence analysis determinative those limit costs it's hollow cost multiplied interest because actions combined with complex errors lost in patent law class actions the interest can make trials on the manageable recipe for prolonged litigation efficient court review underpins patent innovation that averts nuclear war and a host of actions to class random 16 random global cooperation to achieve advanced technique and globalization actions class political imperative conduct created driver IB nuclear war genocide no disease environment challenge and robotics tech there was a conversion activity with the rapid innovation cost disciplines of provided IP laws patent law include district court litigation and district court litigation concerning validity proceeding weakening patent protection may have unintended consequences the effect of strong IP cannot be overstated efficient critical solutions sustainable climate change life one is likewise peer demand these advanced technical hit solutions conflict growth the US economy has always been a leadership and second advantage to solve problem any compensation the global community on strong stable IP rights the economy advantage one growth sustainable the bias destruction is existential triad for the media economic class markets 20 super participating lectures never cover the structural crisis reinforcing conversion toward progression climate biodiversity sickening by chemical impacts rising technology leading side vulnerable for human crisis loss functionality care crisis survival comes no like position affected inhabitable emissions reaching 2020 weekends direct crisis missing climate consequent natural system cover itself through suffering with the body gives result incapable of independent cyber for the economy financial the production is about 8% lower the drop is more than IPC considered necessary to contain warming maintaining capital mechanism disaster for in society 2 crisis now looking transition micro melons 20 upward states will shift to have toward sustainable economy increasing social globalization occur crisis transformation crisis offer opportunity for nation for crisis as a climate change spending injection versus level of difference towards capital in favor of investment media and then right reaction for population and local production people perceive the future as uncertain and potato actions needless of the alternative 3 growth size unstable water research 268 Hernandez and then 21st one expenditure about essential missing life for food and energy supply on order population lifestyle and climate scarcity for the trade and commodities links between both and research condition highlighted extraction of exploitation of the hurdle and the basis of ability both and by close link as conflict with research studies is growth incompatible with water precipitate per capita term fried correlation with GDP and water for economic growth cost line derivation no inverted EKC enhance growth offset second through company growth these high thermodynamic laws 4 down towards world cost war world quality diversion in war tricks me as like even one of the empirical laws hard to imagine large scale war that level destroying a lot of ways to fill the economy down to first word in special circumstances for the US 740 protection get party 20 wars unloaded economy station on some wars also they will particularly achieve victory the motivation of wars it's good economic gain 5 no trade impact miscast 21 interference things in check how like people so and the results are they cannot rely solely on trade coordinator to other trade difficult have critical impact so to use 3 IS impacts in Russia Ukraine Saudi countries increase expected 6 no cyber impact lose 20 United States actors and mostly like able to cause damage to not certain trade about trying with the ability to they are unwilling to risk retaliation no cyber cyber state emphasis on espionage coercion use of penalty notice tax over times who produce equal retaliation and ever as we never occurred the orchestration limit attack access to the high degree control by advanced states Russia or China will be also attack of the use of run the only way but attack to engage a major on conflict 7 declines strength in co-op in the long run half of 20 change the competition regular cooperation to receive level scrutiny cuts under my institutionalization short and cultural media term who got up recently updated data included areas from around the world immediate effect of the government to shift the domestic member states which super big okay hard to look at the breakdown of areas only temporarily so institutionalization long run choices and cooperation economic effective preferred model cooperation talk only a little in 9 financialization makes sure the stable Jackson 19 of energy will be broken concert no inevitable automation and the have For the manifest monster prosecuting funds the markets led to problems with culminating price led to speculation readers the making money cheaper invest instead of speculation fueling inequality that we not physical no monster renewables emerging trends equal to the task of pragmatic achievable ports advantage 1 no ports equal extinction in fact their card is worse out that just says ports are key to infrastructure development not tied to any external threat 2 COVID zero development UGLC 21 COVID in fact it's 4 now emerging economic COVID high mortality lose 22 and 40 billion also to come back to extra determined African change succession rate and these are East Asian Latin American exchange traction FTA, a critical for all economies, all by 2%, 100% voting, the currency appreciation 50% macro, debt burden started this 1.4 trillion, 3 structural economic issues, hamper development, 21 leading poverty, little diversity, manufacturing, agricultural, major base for lack of diversity, exports, media, depends on the few products, or one of the shark, one of the becomes competitive extreme, whether it's a perfect loss of control, work access, tariffs, would lead to loss in competitiveness, 4 weak health care system lockdowns, shepherds 20, disaster developing countries, health care system, 1 point level, unemployed, time, so racket poverty, 2 different face around developing countries, affected by lack of there's safety nets, countries are facing, health payment prices sharp, all currency, 0.70 trillion investor on the verge of dollar prices, hurt investment for decades. 5, forward working condition, declining work, labor force, budget, wage gap, the AFT, work condition, Sean, 6% informed job result, like social protection, rather focus on labor force contribution, women, 6 earns 20% less demand, women should be same rate, GDP, which up by 26, the difficult to change, down 6, 12 millions over, farmers support 150 million, support work, also social, this for the health education, 6 renewables, on solve warming condition, 18, tech potential, potential, limited by what is sort of emission level, unit, 1 unit, alternative energy space, 1 10, 1 to the, of a fuel 10 electricity, demand increase, renewable production, that's when the injury history, efficiently, examples, confirm the old trend. 7, NDTs are infeasible, economics, quality, technical, 20 years, NDTs are economic, political, remix 2, does not allow the implication together, market, issue, online, switches, now through the mitigation, harm, rather than support, business, industry, order, on the lobby, contract, argue for CES, environment groups, office marketing, checking the support of the future, rain, climate, experts, 8, renewable sales, technology, economics, and problems, Simon, 16, 100% renewable costs for dollars, Western German, has experience with investment in renewables, but because of industry nature, production, now with only 0.8% requirements, capital costs, 3 times, and so much down, dispatchable results, serious problem, need back potential generation, either job supports, on my supermarket, constantly 1/3, 1% of the inventory, the land area, 20% of the lower 48 states would take 29.3 billion, the solar PV panels of 4.4 million battery modules produced, would take 190 and use electrification, transportation, hospital, shipping, developed, no, private relevant, grossly underestimate, grossly underestimate.
Which card? Grossly underestimated.
It was the Lyman 16 card.
Cool. You good?
Yep.
All right. Status of the counterplans.
Status quo is always an option.
What are the net benefits?
Sunsets is internal. Advantage counterplan is DDEV and court clog. CIL is internal. Consent decrees is court clog.
Okay. Wait, consent decrees is court clog. Okay. Advantage counterplan. Why does it? Or I guess you're not saying it solves the second advantage or first advantage. Okay. Consent decree counterplan. What does this compete on?
It does not prohibit anything because the consent decrees are a settlement, not a form of litigation that results in an antitrust prohibition.
Okay, so does the conduct not stop then after the settlement?
It does stop. It stops via settlement rather.
Yeah,
than
so like
litigation.
settlement happens and then they don't get any wrongdoing, they don't get any financial punishment. Why wouldn't they just continue the same actions?
Because our evidence indicates that well, that's what a settlement is. Like when you
I know, but why wouldn't they continue?
Engaging.
They settled on their previous conduct, but why wouldn't they just continue the same conduct if they know that they're not going to ever get punished?
Because our evidence indicates that the settlement amount that they would have to pay would result in them stopping the conduct.
Wait, what? Which card?
That's the first card I read on the counterplan.
Consent decrees don't have settlement with financial punishments. What card says that? It just firms admit no wrongdoing. They just identify the infringement. Sorry?
What's your question?
What portion of the card do you think says that they get a financial punishment? The middle of the card says it does not identify an infringement. The firms admit no wrongdoing.
Well, the card explicitly says the alternative is a settlement and fix the anti-competitive effect by the practice by
Yeah, but like what says financial settlement though?
Well, it may not necessarily.
The point of the counterplan is that it threatens the litigation and it threatens to take companies to courts.
Okay,
Our
but
argument is that
how is
companies
that threat legitimate if they have the antitrust exemption?
Well,
it would threaten to remove the exemption and litigate.
Okay, what portion of the counterplan text do you think says that?
Says what? That
it threatens to remove the exemption in the context of.
That's what a settlement is. When you
No, it's not what a settlement is.
When you reach a settlement, you threaten litigation because the companies don't want to litigate. They settle beforehand.
Okay, so what happens when the company continues to violate conduct after the counterplan?
They would not. That's the point.
I mean, but what happens when they
negotiate
continue to do it
commitments.
because they didn't ever get punished?
The point.
Let's
is
just
they
say
will not.
hypothetically they don't. What does the government do?
Government do? Well, again,
They just don't do anything.
I think the point is like the settlement would solve it. I think that's like the question of our insolvency. So I mean, I'm not really sure.
Okay, so
ask anymore.
Sunsetting. What portion of the act does it compete
on? We think
Does not mandate the plan. It establishes a vote on the plan to happen in the future on the shipping exemption, but at no point does it mandate the plan.
Okay. We have 10 minutes starting now. Stopped at 547.
I sent it out. I'm gonna switch my mask real quick and then I'll give an order. The order is going to be advantage 1, advantage 2, the advantage counter plan, consent decrease counter plan, CIL, sunsets, clog. Is anyone not ready? Oh, okay. Let me know when you're ready, Nate. Yeah, you good? Cool, cool. Now's anyone not ready? All right. Awesome. Economic decline triggers great power through reversion conflicts and populism that slew independently growth solves new existential risk from tech black walls by enabling crucial tech innovation as Ashton Browder goes conceded. Wall goes out, that's 120. This is depression, make war likely striking fast moves, projections, and hypertension, also making more difficult to reach. Markets of one more war prone, independently causes diversionary conflicts and hotspots. Every hotspot is what's hallucinating. Risk of the world was so enormous if we had a nuclear compounds for ourselves, the violence raising the release of rest of flash points. Yes, they agree. The Kashmir reports basically saying economic justice. Fuel the conflict of the risk of finishing wars rising in Europe. The stage of the review of this empirically proven by World War II. No transition required is terrible. Nothing says that. No explanation for why it would work. No terminal to solving the growth resource thing and the evidence, and no evidence says that it goes nuclear. Absolves by establishing strong supply chains disadvantage to them. That transition is impossible. Smith and 21. The regrowth is impossible except for the very short people in Europe and the activists reject the pushing the growth of the car. At about 7,000 year very population, the population growth, the population income stride, the suicide, except the declining living standards not of the interaction, housing, transportation, medical care, not having growth is economic without their equal history. They fashion have been able to advance beyond the media about, and yes, decoupling best most recent studies and leakage strong health fund to know that progress of quality life and the property that seem like life business with literacy that they economic for mortality fall in this for making clean energy, but that was all about everything costs tenfold the producing more than government solar aluminum hydro the big oil to get the manage long where will design track absolute coupling emissions so like decrease the energy countries to decouple the including yourself not change the reversal of emissions sort of export like the territorial because of emissions generally low physical law growing emissions replaced by the zero carbon emissions and growth of sustainable new state of this appears in 20 discourse which the preemptive moments of rules rocket belief that in technical top down the takes about assessing not been past measures that the essential needs are cheap infrastructure needs less than 4% of the energy demand only must improve the energy needs maybe less than the protection deprivation reduction energy and impact the rich needs to except that they're starting to dematerialize evidence growing the consumption patterns changing lifestyle choices drive down requirements and transition wars zero solvency crunch on that conflict increasing significantly frequency and
the post-global driven, the migration, poverty, unemployment, the climate change, scarce resources, the geopolitical tensions, major wars, disrupt adaptation, wars, the accelerate post-global challenges, and the no biodiesel tipping point, the 50 million goes, the plant suffered exchanges that's life, so 2060, not right details of the exchange for improves resilience, makes no sense of the existing point of biology belongs to the lost, but the way the earth collapses, the Monterey, so there's no rationale, there's no evidence, and evidence to find the ecosystem collapse globally, even locally, the collapse of small collapse now, but never all over 600 experiments, non-natural collapse in COVID-19 proves capitalism is financial sustainable, no structural collapse of causal in spells like in 20 of the years, unlike the head towards the structural green break, depression, crisis, down, easy natural weather, is on display opposite of the Great Depression, the banking system, with the policy actions that didn't take long to press cares of everything, the might of the throwing policy, inflation, something, the crisis, the lubricant, the deal making obstruction, high the Federal Reserve, and I'll always facilitate the Dr. Records and probable inflation, the incentives will anchor the correlation to various all the reserve currencies deeply interested. These make up for very favorable financing conditions. Their last card about creating international cooperation doesn't have a terminal to it, but we also but it's also disproven by the new evidence in every economic collapse in the past. The cyber attacks on LNG ports trigger nuclear level explosions, the collapse supply chains, and fruit and triggers what Sinkai cyber about broader grid attacks, not ships, GT, and attacks are coming out because ships are vulnerable. Advantage 2. Port innovation. Yes, ports extinction. Yes, this is on the scale of nukes and existential Mutombos conceded not. Answer by the defense. The app solves port infrastructure, which is key to resource distribution to insulate against climate threats and allow adaptation to be effective. It's unique from all causes. 2 and 3 are both old about COVID. That's in the past. Countries are rebounding, and they're all the when I see evidence that the countries are aiming towards SDGs now and following along ports are the last factor preventing it. All evidence assumes that the app solves sustainable development that makes the supply chain resilient. One that creates investor certainty and reduce risk of competition distortion by blocking anti-competitive monopoly practices from carriers. This partner 2 is it shifts incentives sustainability cost reduction time. The inevitable focus of where all money goes in the status quo. The PT theories that private money is key. The only way to create efficiency with strong deadlines and key oversight and advocacy that solves the HFW. Healthcare is old and no relevant to the internal link or about climate goals and achieving Paris Accord agreements. Poor working conditions doesn't assume post-COVID rebound. Just as the threat to education, but formalized cooperation is key. Their hard goals in both broad cooperation and renewable do nothing do solve warming. Answer the last card that they cut short to. They're part of a broader plan to integrate goals globally. That includes a multitude of factors like carbon cutting, CCS, and emissions reductions. Scientists confirm goals of the defense doesn't scaling from, but doesn't assume emissions cuts on both sides. Local renewables solve energy independence, which solves nuclear complex independently. Sea level rise triggers radioactive waste oceans that cause extinction. The WFC conceded terminal, which only the app can solve by developing shipping sustainability entities that doesn't assume that your government investment, which solves import innovation is important for climate adaptation. It solves local renewables and sea level rise failure. Sea level rise failure of SDGs causes extinction from climate wars, instability and conflict between developing states from the resource collapse that escalates. UNSC conceded terminal that only app solves absent climate change. Advantage counterpart. Do both. Do the counterpart. Do the app any competition in place. Doesn't solve only creates US programs. Does nothing for global development. Only any of the immediate allows the DOJ to effectively prosecute widespread market misconduct that allows new barriers to entry, alliances whenever they can, spell on effects of just the days of slowdown in industry massive. We are primed for massive events. The Merck doesn't solve private companies, no plank and upgrades. Don't solve single points of failure. It's Merck while funding fails empirically doesn't incentivize innovation and incentivize tech because of lack of pressure, and that's proven empirically. The HFW in 13 the private investment reports important profitable terminal management BPS their variable forward development, financial support and expertise and need for the commercial subjects, improving performance, reduce congestion, minimize delays, and private capital produce crucial. Now the research revealed the best and most efficient way that simply increase port efficiency, throughput, and consent decrees crossed by the permutations. Do the counterplan. The counterplan to compete on enforcement of voter justifies endless slight deterioration changes that still use antitrust law that doesn't compete on the plan to rest of the rich, which makes it impossible to be after the app and through consent decrees. The counterplan fails. Well, into the text. Counterplan fails. Brown says that they don't know the DOJ can't take cases now, so they'll never trust it. Only one defection causes rollback. Private right to deterrence. They don't solve that. He's in the limitation private enforcement. There's a purpose of the private insurance general more enforcement. The study of the 60 private enforcement policies found more actions generate more deterrence. The entire criminal interest enforcement activity losses. Compensating injured parties. The cards about EU, not the US. The cases are distinct. The terms about don't account for the exemption removal. The actions that companies are doing are per se illegal. They are just immunite the plan will resolve them overnight. Deterrence the conduct. It doesn't solve long litigation links to the DA. New cases are certain, requires time and investment. There's also no way this counterplan solves. They know the DOJ can't prosecute now because they've never been able to. CIL. Cross-apply the permutations, antitrust laws consider competition as role from the 11th. Antitrust proposed competition regulations is permutation between cores, basic part of the Samaritan option, the racing constitutional part, and links net benefit or perm shields looks like an unpredictable conflicting antitrust expansion. The permutation plan in USFG increases prohibitions on anti-competitive practices by expanding the scope of customary international law. Justified 1 picks out the counterplan of specification of the plan. 2 proves that benefit is incompatible with the plan or the rest. 3 allowing ban the app process. Counterplan directs app preparation and skews research away from top links, and that's the voter impact is garbage for US, recognizing that over one issue doesn't spill over. None of the evidence says that even that would be sufficient to solve fails absent DOJ enforcement. enforcement cases will be limited and lack of expertise guarantees cases slip through the cuts. That's really destroys certainty of enforcement. It's cold crime and sales not reliable ambiguous lack of certainty even needed for person often disagree with norms decisions practice in terms of not new enforcement changes over time the literature US companies legal certainty absent of agreements obedience out of questions weaker such a legitimacy less restraint practice likely to be risky to on rules laws of permanent legal basis fails. One is certainty only reversing exceptions to locks in private investment certainty years ahead guarantees support innovation of partner. Two is AMC, DOJ, international cooperation, and MLATs are crucial to detecting, deterring, and conducting antitrust cases effectively and inducing and by incentivizing snitching counterplan results in massive gaps in all three and lack of influence. Patent coolest three is private right that was done on the other counterplan. Force capture commission intervenes by consulting industry stakeholders emphasize commercial solutions that don't lower costs or protect other actors even when directly interviewing the labor to avoid stepping on toes on the industry toes that's brown that millions still get involved in the counterplan because it doesn't strip their authority. World order is resilient and no impact to statement and 70 the liberals and they have no understanding the world with the liberal world is much longer than history giving credit for liberal world is long than it's not limited institutions of the period 1914 period the cut card period and sunset counterplan the cross by the permutations the plan to the process counterplan is the way that can be implemented reject counterplans that require the after fraternity immediacy aids to justify or consult around country delay which is extremely unpredictable and explosive for use or ruins meaningful debate over the plan and opportunity cost the only terminal impact ratio doesn't mean so in this codified the user access conditional occurrence as the suggestion is given doesn't solve when supply chains are failing now the pays out wouldn't happen quick enough for meaningful relief to cancel legal certainty that's wondered. Now, benefits joke. No countries make decisions on whether or not they democratize based on U.S. antitrust exemption duration, and at best they inject a bit more democratic participation on one issue and antitrust no spillover and phase out extended super competitive pricing that's committed and intend the antitrust media space facility collusion of the temporary gains of the behavior after the expires of the resumption and enforcement then learn to collude and pretty stupid return of the media delusion even shortly against the media have a line lasting effects and permutation do the plan and they do the counterplan for antitrust and media's topical injections and this is good that was above clog. No link at all. The AFM removes one exemption, not unique to the U.S. DOJ and FTC. FMC are pursuing unsuccessful litigation in the When I see bottom evidence and antitrust litigation is one killing when I see the FTC launched an effort to modernize the agencies and law against sector rating enforcement and Western markets. The law to push the Apple Meta and the Google and moment of the FTC proceeds with the suit and case files inevitable now. The security government trying to get lawsuits nearly double. We typically sold on every computer for a couple months. Last year's the first 8 months 250 comes to 59% increase. Jump to the loss of weight and there's 0 basis for collecting 8% activity. Widespread litigation doesn't support. There's no other studies. There's no examples of settlements of the patents. Plaintiff settled for little. There's absence of in antitrust. There's a little evidence supporting frivolous lawsuits. Might the credit lawsuits. Patent courts are different. No courts but spillover, and their evidence agrees that the statute solves only 1% of cases, so there's no link. That's 6.
Okay. Are you good to go?
Yep.
Reasons to reject the team.
The enforcement counterplans are bad. Counterplans that fiat certainty or immediacy are bad.
Okay. Cool. The case. What evidence have you read that cites data that economic decline is correlated with war?
Yeah, so the Liu evidence indicates that now it'll be there's a high chance of war and the status quo. The Wall evidence also cites data that we re-highlighted.
Your Lewis evidence just lists a bunch of countries and places war could happen. I'm asking what is the statistical and the empirical backing for why economic
the
decline
empirical backing
war.
as per the Liu evidence in the 1AC, which is
sorry,
great.
where is the Liu evidence in the 1AC?
It's in the 1AC. It's in the 1AC. It's on the advantage.
You didn't read Liu. You took it out.
Did. Yeah, we did.
Where is it in the doc?
Where is it in the doc? Yeah.
We might have sent the wrong version, but we read Liu for sure.
Yeah.
Anyway, so yeah. Mark will send it. It was definitely read. We'll send it because it was in the read version, not in the sent version.
You didn't, because it was in your old 1AC. The disclosure doc you sent did not include Liu. I don't think you're okay.
It was read, but the Liu evidence talks about how these crises are more likely, but also we read independent growth innovation solves emerging technology challenges, which was conceded in the 1AC.
Sure. The advantage 2, we read a slew of cards saying developing countries are suffering due to things like the coronavirus, low incomes, lack of investment, extreme weather patterns. Can you coherently explain why improving port infrastructure resolves any of those challenges?
Yeah, the port infrastructure solves a lot of the extreme weather problems. The evidence that we've read in the 1AC says that it'll spill over to result in it'll adapt the countries and their abilities for the supply chains to operate.
What about the other 20 issues that are evidence sites? Why would port infrastructure affect any of those?
Well, because it allows for new technologies to be distributed to the countries. It allows for the implementation of these SDG programs to become effective. It also resolves the downside impacts of flooding, et cetera, which cause mass development problems. Even if there are other alt causes, there's independent terminals that we resolve because result in the broader development.
The advantage counterplan, you read a card that says investment is important. Why does this investment have to be through the private sector? Your evidence is not comparative to government funding?
Yes, it is. It's actually really good. The HFW evidence says that private investment results in a couple things. One is that it results in the ability for private sector investors to provide advice, which is crucial to meeting next goals. Second is they create pressure that pushes for long-term incentives.
I'm asking comparatively, why is government funding bad? I understand what
because it says it's not efficient. It doesn't result in the goals, and they'll just do things that the status quo companies are pushing them to do, which is just to cut costs. They won't actually result in these benefits that HFW says are possible only through the private sector.
Okay, 10 minutes.
Wait, hold on. Can we get that loot card? Kyle, hello?
Yeah, I guess it wasn't red.
It wasn't. Okay.
Yeah.
518. Okay, should be set. Order is going to be advantage counterplan, advantage 1, advantage 2. Move my Zoom window. Did everyone get the doc? Okay, how about that? Cal, all 3 judges. Cool. Was definitively most logical and direct policy option for resolving non-gross sources of external waste. The offense allowed planks of the account line via other internal links to directly invest in systemic protections against external cyber attacks via direct investment resiliency and hardening to modernize support infrastructure to EC1 do both links to benefit includes antitrust policy advance price hikes here contributing to inflation links to DDEV do counterplan severs out of the app. Obviously, same for any combo of planks. Next argument does not create global development. It solves their internal link. All of the app says is the plan just incents investment supports the counterplan directly via offset. They need to win by public investment fails. They say it's not global. 1, irrelevant. They do not have an internal link that matters for this. Ramping up sustainable port investment should substantially open up space for the development of local renewables. 2, counterplan does not specify territorial scope for the second plank. Any port around the world could apply for the grant program. 3, I'm going to amend the counterplan text to make that clear. So to fund sustainable port infrastructure globally, the counterplan text is insert the doc. 2 C counterplans are good. Checks interesting. New authentication theory means just approve a competitive option. Avoids or DA, not the original 1 C counterplan. Also checks vague solid 2 mechanisms that get re-explained in later speeches, which checks sandbagging, and they didn't contest conditionality, so it's obviously justified. We're just clarifying the scope of the counterplan. They see public investment fails. Their cards just advocate for increasing investment in port infrastructure. The counterplan does that. When I see Osmosis in 21, investment in energy efficiency, carbon zero renewables, they also provide major benefits of climate change mitigation and devastation, aiming for a switching political coherence, resilience, building later benefits. Reports confirm increased funding is necessary. Installs PTM 19 report identified 4 billion in port security needs, high funding to maintain the facilities ensuring they address security challenges by refocusing great program. Companies will need either infrastructure needs for internet operations. They technical paper renewed investment includes upgrades to equipment as well as tackle cybersecurity, drone mitigation. We took a deep dive. Approach to increase properly mitigate for security threats. Increased federal funding solves quick and love the witness increasing congestion, ocean water supply, and additional capacity of federal program review card. The transportation program mitigate congestion, provide a favorable legal regime for public investment. The private sector will be the key federal leadership from the fed government. The nation's waterways will continue to be underutilized as private operations support investment needed. Public investment can be captured in the form of revenue, so government action is required. Now, the econ advantage, starting with DDEV. 1, growth is terminally unsustainable. Not unique except we want to see impact. Converging tipping points. We've already hit peak growth, COVID, locked in social environmental collapse, which fire data collapse downs for social transition to outweighs climate change bounties, also ecological overshoot, all render the planet uninhabitable, as well as freshwater depletion. Every carbon molecule add to the atmosphere literally increases the risk of a 6th mass extinction. That's Marquez and Hernandez. 3, turns case for growth locks and reactionary nationalism that makes every global problem solving impossible. Turns advantage. 2, Marquez in 20 pandemic offers opportunity for chance for relational turn less chance before capitalism continues to advance blindly. Other destruction will be living much more world, few opportunities, less money, later do fears about financial issues, right to with national interest making challenges harder to solve, possible paths to chances of adapting to warming. 4, only climate change cause extinction, not nuclear war. Miller McDonald 19, only one check could throw. So the climate destruction be largely coupling the whole global economy, nuclear change that result in positive loss to life, nuclear winter, no reliable model that can determine how many mechanisms of agriculture humans cannot recover from climate change extinction. 6 degrees. 5, growth of lung cause extinction. A, chemicals. Group 17, there are chemical flood is new, and then we lack a productive adaptation, toxic flows preventable, broad growth of the industry is relocating developing countries that is possible to believe themselves in ability and chemical emission undermine immune system reduce intelligence running community less able to adapt increasing conflict and contributing global ecosystem breakdown, augmenting arsenal weapons of mass destruction, their use of nations, B methane, light 19, capitals initiate methane will accumulate for years will be boiled alive. Temperature of Arctic methane is 65 degrees below normal. The event will really cause methane, a 10-degree rise in global temperatures causing extinction. The semi-22 emissions will lead to extermination. C phosphorus for ADG and the Bower 16 of phosphorus. Right now we have to live out food phosphorus essential for all life. It is a key in our DNA. All living organisms require daily phosphorus to synthetic substitute for world's reserves for the last 35 years. So we should leadership of the realized price increase by 600% and influence for prices. 6 complexity also causes extinction. Manpower and 20 complexity extra rich fragility increase over time. Increase complexity system can come for efficiency for robustness. Economic growth continues to effort in a way that's not lead to resources fragility hard to identify for anticipated proliferation of disposable technology failure to set the computer stale. Humans are out of loop. New technology more fragile. Systemic risk exists for systems. Exhibit sufficient fragility to cause a cascading collapse. 2C1 the econ decline debate. You did not read the Lou evidence committed after cross-lex. You do not have a growth solve war terminal in the 1C1A is too little too late. You've also dropped 2 pieces of defense for the 1C1 recessions. Inhibit the resources to wage war. States use other methods to stimulate the economy. The U.S. has undergone 40 recessions. None have been related to the wars it's fought. Security and economic gain motivates war. That's a wall of evidence which clearly concludes our way to trade not solve war, cause interstate violence, exacerbates inequalities and social conflict, which turns the trade impact to the 1C and says it does not decrease the risk of conflict. That's our Pisco evidence. War down to cause wars. 19 war can occur at any stage of recession. Crisis recession recoveries unrealistic. Assume wars occur at any particular stage. Although problems of recession break out at short time, challenge this all stages. The recession wage wars depends on the consideration again loss of wars. War conditions reasons for that break in all stages. The cycle they economic origin for wars, downward pressure, which makes exist during prosperity. During prosperity, people also worried about potential recession. They say tech will straight turn this growth. Only growth-driven innovation cause extinction through tech. Transition solves way 19. Preparation for tech requires real-time political institutions change very quickly. We still need to slow down number of investment in AI development compared to investment spread. Its universal impacts useless. The absence of institutional changes and innovation accelerating. Shelter chemicals and impacts like information structure, nuclear AI, nanotech, genetic and accumulation source facilitation, also by eco-efficiency, residential innovation is noted to sustain absolute decoupling. Human capacity to take complex decision, medium massive automation decisions will become more intelligible and fully dissociated from human interests. Abandon logical growth. Protecting projects by the structure to disobey these transition from competition to sufficiency. AI is far off anyways. That's the only 20 existing AIs are unable to understand basic physical questions like will it just fit through a window? It's hard to believe this place to take over. AIs are 87. A successful narrow task will lack stars to tell you we're decades away from the ability to 5-year-old Boston argue. Plans will look probably high consequences. Silly confused to justify anything is modern day version of Pascal. Early warning signals off switches and red lines. AI turning evils like worrying about overpopulation. On Mars, they say transition is impossible. Hard landing is good. That Schiller Markins collapse roads. A stable transition solves environmental destruction. One mindset shift once the inadequacy of growth is exposed. Resistance crumbles. Green activists have prefigured policies that typically mainstream their narratives to force choice. People realize their options are to change or die. So the most basic psychological instinct for survival pushes them to reject consumerism. It's try or die. 1% risk is sufficient. Van der Rohe in 21 real world. Degrowth resistant network is spread over 50 countries. Locally produced food renewable and community activism attempts to localize economy in both the North and South. The goal should be initiated simply rational that humanity continue to consume resources the rate in which we do and not reach for the capitalism has existed for at least the future years. Large financial degrowing but overcome capitalism remains imperative. Continue to work towards the Earth-based goal. We don't even need to win it. Decline eliminates capital necessary for ecological destruction. Enrich in 21. The economy is transition. Globalization been around for a few decades. GDP growth fell 35% emissions. Some only the trend they fell drops significantly was the last time the economy contracted growth. The river ecosystem. There are other ways we're in society. 99.9% of human history was managed not all through the atmosphere. Now the decoupling debate. Only absolute negative decoupling is sufficient. Is warrant in country 20 decoupling growth. No decoupling may be absolute no relative works or occurs when the rate of growth is higher than the rate of consumption. Absolutely occurs when growth of the company by decoupled increase energy was achieved. Absolutely decoupling the UK achieved. Absolutely that's not enough sufficient planetary boundaries have been breached. Countries achieve absolute decoupling for short periods kind of outside growth and more open countries regarding overall increases effects are hidden by moving production developing world inflation prevent effects improvements and efficiency like where you see produce such absolutely not consistent. Decoupling is not consistent with growth. No uniqueness for decoupling anyways. Average in 21 despite 25 years of fruitless negotiations. Even with COVID which slowed cost of production which unprecedented 7% governments have no stimulus and high carbon emission of renewable energy for system to global encourage innovation and decoupling involves just location but atmosphere is not by boundaries and 35 period study found out massive speed reduction due to hot warming cannot be achieved through decoupling by reshoring. We're not getting rid of fossil fuels. There's not enough land to accommodate net zero carbon sinking. Also reject their transition possible cards. One professor's opinion writing on Substack, the car is terrible. It's not assume a world of collapse which transcends transition. The sustainability debate grows from the unsustainable ratings of a complex scenario inevitable. Every warrant cannot be structurally captured by a case solvency winning one loan is sufficient. One resource scarcity, we're losing minerals, food, and productive land. Energy sources at rapid pace. We need the equivalent of 1.5 plants just to survive. 2 COVID ruptured societal instability produced the deepest decline in recent history, producing the impetus for movements away from growth. That's Mark West. 3 disease, climate change, ecological devastation. Mark West in 20 no longer be possible to expect new growth about economy, ecological health chaos, which generated by climate and pollution, wildlife habitat destroying private food system, zoonosis, common decade marked by other pandemics, posters redefining economic activity, post-pandemic globalized capitalism, impeded by imbalances, nerve structures, stagnation, and forestry growth begun, Brexit, extreme right governments with passion to characteristics, we are approaching a threshold beyond the planet's ecosystem, sources, we are in a period of collapse, Earth and planet pressure, stop the growth of water, ensures the evidence of warfare, extreme globalization made business, vulnerable to destruction, 6 years weekend, the hottest food systems, drive loss of 3 tree cover, industrial fishing system, sacrificing oceans, features, acidification, creating dead zones, rupture, traffic exchange, and industrial pollution, carbon bubble, and peak oil rift in 19 decline in price of solar wind will lead to transit assets, for investors oblivious to the speed of energy transfer falling demand as well as bandwidth pipelines, power plants and industries industrially stranded, carbon bubbles, largest industry, collapse of industrialization, carbon
between 23 and 30 US will be caught between fallout from peak oil. Reject the 2 cards they read from the Breakthrough Institute. Thacker 14. Thank you, Spain, supposed lobbying organization with little transparency. That's for lack of instruction. We're a case for points. The Breakthrough Institute run by Ted Nordhaus put through word of peace, highly criticized for pleasure picking information. Just like how true breakthroughs read at their PR, the Breakthrough has a clear history as a country outlet program for launching your way to fame and fortune. They say transition wars, it's peaceful. 1, crossplay econ defense above. 2, empirics disprove Cuba successfully transition. That was all the transition evidence. 3, they don't go global. Small billions don't cause planetary extinction, so equal collapse outweighs. 4, does not assume social innovation. So rocket all 16 crisis accelerated space for disruptive changes. The empirical example of social innovation results in crisis put forward alternatives. Crisis accelerated these social innovation decrease pressures regimes that lead to fundamental change in economic paradigm crisis. Change understanding values and relationships. Empirical observation just didn't the crisis encourage alternatives. Crisis the ingredients for chaotic period of structural change. Crisis rise on discussion debates on initiative time making transition movement go hand in hand. The LNG argument, the cyber defense applies. I'll get to that below, but there's no impact LNG anyway. Shock and 10, igniting pressurized LNG oil is technically problematic. The probability of catching fire is extremely low. This occurred the lateral force of the explosion be constrained by the tankers will force the energy upwards. Seeking fire is equally challenging and would at minimum require a large quantity of explosive time planes to transport their series expertise to know where to place the bombs. These post-word barriers for a single attack, which was 3 ships required to block the strait. The BioD argument, they said BioD existentially the other advantage. They can't go for this because it's a double turn. And we also read other extinction impacts. This card only indicts biodiversity tipping points, not any other ecological scenario that we've read. Cyber attacks, no impact. Entities lack capacities to cause damage, uncertainty, ensures credible retaliation, which ensures large-scale cyber attacks. And they and no cyber impact. Words 18 cyber words mostly hype and imagine academics and industry. Profit from anxiety, cyber culture, limited scope, severity, shared drugs. We can get to that. Produce no lasting impact. Real impact is rare and difficult, explosive, fleeting, aggressive viruses can be repackaged or they're repackaged. We'll take a little prep first. Okay, I'm good for cross X.
Good. All right, let's talk about the turn. When has a transition effectively ever happened before away from growth?
When has an economic collapse on the scale of the 1AC ever happened?
Okay, explain the scenario for the degrowth and how it happens.
The 1AC has identified an impending economic collapse driven by factors such as an inflationary bubble and rising shipping rates. Our argument is that economic collapse, if it is on the scale that the 1AC has identified, and given the latent movements produced by COVID and reactionary nationalism that has produced dissatisfaction with liberal international order, will produce new economic cooperatives in which communities will localize for more sustainable cooperative communities that are less reliant on the global infrastructural system.
Do you have any cards that say that growth will stop and companies will stop working, et cetera, in the US?
Companies will stop working in the US.
Companies will stop developing innovation and tech innovation and stuff like that.
Do not exist in the world of degrowth. But our argument is that on the whole, a degrowth economy is one that is less reliant upon international supply chains, flows of international trade.
So
and
all you're saying is that
there's just like a
reduced chance of, you're just saying there's like maybe a 5% reduced chance of all the impacts in the 2NC is what a degrowth situation looks like.
All of our, like the card that I specifically read under the transition
what
debate
card
says,
have you read?
The Irish evidence says that economic collapse, GDP growth, declines in GDP growth are empirically correlated with declines in emissions. It means
no, but
that
it assumes a short term.
It's
talking about 3 to 4 years. Okay, so let's talk about climate change. The impact is like so basically the differential between the AF and the status quo is that the climate change will kill us 10 to 12 years later.
No, the difference between the AF and the status quo is that right now we have the opportunity to degrow the economy
let's talk about the
before we reach existential climate tipping thresholds, which just materialize in the next few years.
How does the status quo result in resolving climate change after the growth collapsed? Can you explain the scenario? How do renewables develop? Who like shifts the things? Who is in power? What happens?
I think I've already explained the likely governance structures that would materialize in a world of degrowth.
So the US government goes away. There's little differences in energy consumption trends.
All of our evidence indicates that energy consumption, resource consumption, all of that is materially less in a degrowth society because
only in the period of
for the sake of production.
None of the evidence indicates
for the sake of survival.
Do you have a card that says that there's a long-term decline in those things that happens?
What do you mean a long-term decline?
Like all your cards say that in the short term.
Basically, every card in the 1NC that advocates for degrowth is saying we need to degrow the economy because it leads to long-term declines in emissions.
What is the
Marquez evidence for the 1AC?
What is the complexity impact, and can you explain the complexity impact?
It's basically an extension of the it's extension of the tech impact, except it's not identifying specific technologies. It's just saying that generally the growing complexity of systems is producing the potential for systemic risk. Technologies are fragile. It produces potential for a flash crash in an embedded technological or financial system that would wreak havoc across the global economy, and our evidence says that would produce existential risk.
Something out. Okay, should we start? The order will be advantage 2, the CIO counterplan, the consent decrees counterplan, the court clog DA, the CIO counterplan, the sunsets counterplan.
Do that one more time. Yeah.
Yeah. Advantage 2. The consent decrees counterplan, the court clog DA, the CIO counterplan, the sunsets counterplan. Good to go?
No, I don't have it up yet.
Good now? Okay.
Yep.
Awesome.
The port infrastructure impact is word salad. The closest they get to a terminal is saying we need to adapt and make port infrastructure resilient to climate change and save solve extinction or population growth. Global trade is particularly not critical to the future survival of the human race. People get necessity domestically like they did it for past several centuries. The impact is still inches, not really external from anything else. Now, 1C2, all causes emerging economies. COVID destroys billions of income. And FDI fell by 42% last year alone. That's usually the LC evidence. The shipper says we calculate all causes. And AFD says poor working conditions and declining workforce participation structurally depresses the ability for jurisdiction to invest in local renewables and more sustainable port infrastructure. Even if there is no exception to the books, they do not have a card for their internal liquidity port investments. The government implementing broad commit to SDGs or investing in local renewables, sustainable environments are all bark. No bite right now. The SDGs have to produce crunch anything to share their directly lack of coordination. They're just after local governments labor what are they doing? How is being not really SDGs, global emissions. We're set to rise and hit all time high. Let's be honest about lots of talk and little action. The extend 1C4. The renewables can't solve warming. They can't diminish emissions at necessary levels. Jamon's paradox means efficiently leads to an increase in total consumption with price production and energy levels. The Gunter said evidence now. The consent decrees counterpoint taking it. We're not going for none of the solvency deficits across applicable because sunset removes exemptions. It's a 1 year does cross apply to an argument to answers. Enforcement counterpoint's bad in terms of totally arbitrary. What is the enforcement counterpoint? Every counterpoint competes off of changing enforcement. Regularly competes off of prohibitions for non-antitrust statutes. States counterpoint changes enforcement by not using the federal government. Their progresses into no net fiat. Our interpretations that we get enforcement counterpoints key to necklace. Key says prohibit and antitrust keywords key on this topic where they're limited staff. No DAs besides clear off and clog, which are also impossible to win without a counterpoint. Anyway, competition determines the order legitimacy. If when the counterpoint competes, it presents an opportunity cost the half. Sunsets counterpoint is on enforcement counterpoints. Sunsets exemption isn't changed. And enforcement action, the court clog is that can see the code clog is inevitable and there's no spillover patents not going for it. CIO counterpoint can see the permutation not going for it. The world order resilient card defense cannot cross applicable to any other pages because it impacts red democracy and then it's not cross applicable to DDEV. If it was implicitly answered to the 2C and we answered below. Now the sunsets counterpoint, they drop the impact. Participatory democracy always on magnitude. What is Eaton says solves extinction. The Pence process is undemocratic and technocratic and crushes the global signal of legitimacy. The counterpoint says it can reverse the needle. That's the first and Wally piece of evidence. Our first argument was cross applying the permutation. They do not get to just cross apply the perms. totally unclear which first or what this means. I will answer to both and do the counterpoint, but the one error pulls of another random first permutation, we get new answers. Now, the permutation to both. One, the counterpoint is mutually exclusive. You can't review something that doesn't exist. The counterpoint uses the plan as a lever to Supreme Court democratic oversight. Two, including the plan's undemocratic process signal, causes drift away from interest democratic tools. The process and interest form overdetermines its content, start discard, wall, energy, institutional aspects of declared about the democratic goals of interest space. Since it was control the heck of movie away from the democratic roots of person should be an express value of competition level with the one with democracy was true. Consumer choice of something else from the person need the law. And most of the first democratic better than first due process transparency. Three, one instance spills over while 19 signs of the board consequence shift power democratic institution less democratic institution of agency courts were non-majority curious occurring. Why do they matter without such power? Democratic institution less democratic forces of the legislature prove they should say so that they not. So should not be shift the power of the favor while the legislature should return to attention to the other prosecution enable that to accomplish ability. For the counterpoint such as Kino, Sunshine, test legislation, immediate fiat with the public hearing, crush the signal, the participant democracy, interest, bond, 22, message to the sunshine, open here, the very real concern, sunshine, those afterwards were marked up in a closet committee without any input, testimony would lead, also for the public hearing, sunshine, central, the term removed, to close market, all legislation, need passage on just probing question, debate 5, currently the plans for happening is key to democratic legitimacy, while there are these meetings were happening and make the tradition making more democratic capitalist laws, credit to the values instead of inverse rule, allows legislative to recognize agencies, to determine whether agencies are purpose at target, to use permutation of the counterpoint. One, the counterpoint is functionally and textually competitive. It has Congress review the exemption, then vote on whether it is worth preserving. If the vote says yes, it stays. If they vote no or don't vote, the counterpoint is off the books. Removal of the exemption is an uncertain effect, not a mandate. The counterpoint two, the counterpoint is not an over outright prohibition fish. And they've offset these such a prohibition Congress now prohibition allowing users freely set the prohibition for automatically offset the prohibitions have been defeated the way of balancing. Three, prohibitions must have no exception to 87 the court. The jurisdiction with prohibition laws regulatory laws the same law prohibits the perverted conduct subject prohibition was satisfied by regulatory California that prohibits California operates state lottery bingo's over legally responsible California letter out of the fact California purpose a single letter applicable to California regulatory. Only four, that means California picks out the California, the plant's expansion of scope of the anti-salt waters, one of the use, not an influence to permit the limits of scope. 5, the California's function to take subsidized legislation, use substantially different legislation than permanent legislation pin 10. Such a cause of allocated transition costs, so let me instance of different legislative result. Otherwise, 6 resolving certain durable random house 8 6 resolve affirmative represent 7 substantial means certain towards very 64 the most substantial means certain should is immediate certain some percent consequent instruction should is more several should would mean almost loss immediately effective as much in the future increase means immediate you move level or decrease and then extra function rather than objective so obligation increase unthinkable as not adequate to find limits of a duty. Our interpretation is keeping that ground laws a non-certain non-immediate action will the abstract every day breeding circumvention against themselves. Counterpoint picks out the UFC only uses Congress marijuana using the delegate reference to a group as a whole. UFC is all 3 branches. She was like, the 9 USFG, the 3 branches, the 2EC, the next argument was the term to the counterpoint through the process of the counterpoint. This is just term to the counterpoint. Answer above the counterpoint is not just certainty immediacy, which were the deficit, the competition arguments above. But if it is, it just spreads the question of them winning the competition debate. The next argument was a delay for supply chains argument. 1, no impact today. The counterpoint only happens 3 months after the other impacts price out level of time sensitivity. 2, delay length as much as them. The DOJ would have to engage in endless years of litigation to prosecute every shipping company across hundreds of different ports. So either the act can't solve fast enough or the time frame differential is relevant. Next argument is legal certainty. We learned the counterpoint's outcome is certain. It schedules congressional review the rooms. The exception provides legal clarity. The businesses. 2, there's no impact to certainty. No one is the internally depends on it. Just remove the exception so that suits can be brought. 3, this also links to them. Litigation itself would certainly free business now. The next argument was capture. No capture. The plan is popular. Everest Hillstrom to super job for use business companies who lobby to reject my part of the last as far as we can react to business part of the ocean. The shipping before the bill power of freedom. Benefits everything is reusable. South of the sale of the house was one of the 30 kilometers of the December Cardinals lobby the Congress of his bill so the council will be because of the disclosure and providing lobbies to make the bill including national relationship of American European Federation Pacific Farm Groups and lawmakers to distribute the agents of access to government person CEO of consumer technology section will represent the technical all startups and Amazon savings that accept the short term passive glued and raise prices for the US customers to cut the card at US customers. Next argument was that benefits the joke. Yes, spill over. One is the evidence explicit. Waller says one instance in quote moves legal. 2 see analytics are unawarded and John just like 1 year explanation. Final argument was the intrinsic firm. 1 democracy external classified links from both. The purpose not shield solved. 2 the counterpoint. The purpose functionally intrinsic was to add substance reviews over condition that's not made up. The counterpoint functional intrinsic is legitimate. Textual competition allow the abstract treated spice words create new atoms and make advantage counterpoints landmines.
Okay, we have 5:47. I'm gonna start when I mute. up to 215. Our stand just fell apart, so it's gonna take a second to figure out. It's out the order. Oh shit, hang on. The order is the second advantage, reports advantage, then the advantage counter plan, then the sunsets counter plan, and then the first advantage and all the DDEV debate. Does anyone need that again? We're good to go. Cool. Anyone not ready? All right, I'm gonna start in about 5 seconds unless someone stops me verbally. They just extended line by line and dropped everything. Yes, ports extinction is on the scale of nukes and existential. The Mutombo evidence is conceded. It's not answered by any defense except for them just saying it's word salad. The AF solves port infrastructure, which is key to resource distribution to insulate against climate threats and allow adaptation to be effective, which is unique from all causes and prevents those resource wars. It says it's at the level of extinction and prevents climate crisis and resource disputes, which solves the warming terminals. We're not going for SDGs. This all causes it disproves the ability for degrowth to solve anything because it means there's no way to change significant investment now. It's not portion infrastructure, which is the only impact we're going for. The advantage counter plan do both. No other net benefit. Public funding fails empirically doesn't incentivize innovation because of lack of pressure. That's the Merck evidence. The HFW evidence is really good. It says private investments key to foster innovations necessary for the commercial and social objectives because of resource constraints, and then you do be able to adapt to a crowd out and go 20. The R&D spending is at the growth. So basically, we have relations to government expenditure, private DF and infrastructures. We study 3 distinct types of firms: government independent firms and non-industry firms, and peers, non-peer firms. We find out that government R&Ds, government investment R&Ds, whereas their industry peer contact lead on that day government spending accounts at the industry level and R&D. Mark the card at R&D. Yes, global deficit. Their defense was terrible too. There's no spillover. The global doesn't mean that countries accept it or have any influence on the ability to invest in the right places. 2 and 3 counterplans are voted free out of arguments, late breaking debates, and undermine stasis. The sunsets counterplan. Sunsets. Go to sunsets. I'll do that later. Get this over here too. Oops. Okay. Let's just get. Okay. I mean, I'm just gonna go to DDEV right now. We'll go back to sunsets. Or the advantage one. Cyber attacks on LNG ports trigger nuclear level explosions, collapse supply chains, ensure food and triggers war. That's Sinkai. The cyber impact is uniquely not covered well. The defense is terrible, doesn't assume attacks, says they're on the nuclear level. Yes, retaliation is an doctrine. It's much more true. The counterplan doesn't solve this, and they have no defense to this terminal impact. DDEV proper independently growth solves nuclear existential risks from tech black box by enabling crucial tech innovation. That's Ashburner evidence. The loose evidence is every hotspot escalates. It assumes new evidence as on the breaking converging populist dynamics guarantee extinction, which causes a short run economic impact. Once you read note card that it doesn't cause war defense, assume new dynamics. It's old evidence is decked by linkages. Things like World War II, which guarantee nuclear extinction. Nuclear war causes extinction. Let's get that card going. That stars at 17. Peer review studies have authoritatively must be unchallenged. Scientists have state-of-the-art modeling could significantly depend on global and weather counter global famine leading to surface mined and firestorms that could which would form defense and smoke layer 20 years that would amount of weeks lead to ice age and growing spears being eliminated, which would eliminate majority of the population. No turns to evidence just says nationalism, not war. Climate's not existential. Their models fail. Pepper says 19th also the climate reaction risk the chance of extreme warming simplistic modeling no responsible measures based on a bad approach 10 degrees of collapse civilization. Mark the card at civilization. Climate degrowth doesn't say climate change fast enough. It's try for technology. They only answer emerging technology, not climate investment. SDG goals priorities 21. The broad rush that climate degrowth eclipse never died up and machine out chain claims spread up leftly and equated for climate growth degrowth. First what's getting humanity not really degrowth solves it turns out optimistic we have lower chance by factor than 10 years. That's impossible capitalism in the time frame. There's little anti-radical plans to radical blood up in the next decade. Chemicals impact the environment. The overall environment's impact is resilient. We didn't read biody on the advantage 2 by Bailey 20 according to ethics we kill off civilization much is wrong exaggeration. Not constitute environmental threats global within technology. Them climate change is not the end of the world. Humans are becoming extinction cannot be involved. Humans are adapting. We continue technical progress and the trans methods. Just climate terminal defense already red phosphorus shortages don't cause wars. Just proven by shortage now, which evidence says it's stupid and degrowth doesn't solve mining. Emerging tech impact people pursue it either way. No impact in Baker 22. Do you believe we go to extinction from super intelligence? I'd be highly skeptical. We should relate super intelligence magic sense not be the same analogy as what it'll do with us with the Doe does. Mark the card Doe does. We'll also concede it's too long run. They said that the other tech impacts distinct and solves warming transition is impossible and sustainably means that there will be up and down cycles. None of their evidence means people actually backlash undermine institutions or transform the whole system. That's disproven by literally every collapse ever. This one is not unique. The one is the evidence says it's prone to war dynamics kill everyone, so it's about to live another day. That's the Smith evidence. Mindset shift does not resolve challenges. It's disproven by history. No reason now is unique. It's bullshit. It's not tried out. That's all above. The end capital doesn't reverse anything with the terminal. Proven by COVID, which undermined markets. All also worse or net worse for the environment. New transition. Everyone rebounds either way, which makes the argument not unique. The Crenshaw evidence is really good. Transition wars zero solvency. The post environment's unique. Lab 21D from Cuba to South Africa. Violent conflicts and have been on the global friction for economic hardships with COVID would and foreshadow global $200 and more fit to uprising. So the stability of the scale continues rising in Latin America and Asia, or more likely to boil over. Mark the card at over. It is sustainable financialization. Assumes COVID. The pure evidence is really good. It's the newest data. Assumes every factor that we're rebounding, developing new resilience and changing systemic ways. The evidence about resources are and shorter windows with tech upgrades with competition like IoT. Yes, decoupling the path for evidence is the best and most recent studies and linkage is wrong. Yes, decoupling Nordhaus or power evidence is best power. 18 researchers just dynamic relations of CO2 emissions and symbiosis between clean energy. These G20s the whole fills in gaps in the area and our solves the necessary port infrastructure, which causes adaptation, which is the terminal, the counterplan. Conceded the net benefits a joke. No countries make decisions on whether or not to democratize based on U.S. antitrust exemption duration, and that it's a bit more democratic participation on one issue of antitrust. No spillover other issues. Stuff like Guantanamo, voting rights, gerrymandering, and effective side promotion. Didn't read a solvency mechanism or answer to a certainty deficit. Certainty is a massive deficit. Just the threat of broader industry capture means the counterplan can't solve it. Barnard says reductions of 30 years. So no one would be sure because they are certain because they would be worried about future whiplash, which doesn't cause investment. Absolves through full removal. Intrinsic perm. They conceded intrinsic perm results in net benefit. Says it results in an infinite advantage. Counterplans didn't read anything to it before the timer went off. It's justified. Picks out of the counterplan specifications. The voter proves the net benefits isn't compatible with the plan, allowing ban and process counterplans, Rex alpha preparation and skews research away from the topic. That's a voter perm to the counterplan. Conceded reasons for our interpretation. Rejects counterplans that require the AF to defend certainty means the interpretation justifies worse counterplans like random consult or delay. That's simply unpredictable and makes it impossible to be often research and analyst applies the counterplans to answer. The Encarta definition conceded should doesn't mean certain all as a risk of offense. Teams can't get to it. Prohibitions are merely hinder. Lynch to prohibiting symbols applied to mass majority. Mark Carter vast majority. Precipitation means greater includes exemptions. Work 12. The result of the circle or the district going to be entirely that of representation is defined to mean great extent. Mark the card extent resolve includes new policies. Louisiana 5. The result resolution the legislative instruments sustaining policies so that resolutions conserve resolved.
Hey, can we get those extra cards in a marked copy before we start prep? Cal, did you hear me?
Oh, no, sorry. I was good.
Can we get a marked copy on the cards that you read that were not in the 1AR doc before we start prep? Okay, I think is this all of them? Does this include the marked cards too?
Just a quick thing. Mark's sending the marked version out right now, so just give me a second. He's just sending the cards that were marked.
Okay, just because they're on two computers, the first that I is from the cards we marked. Every other card that we read is in full. The second doc that Michael sent is the marks from the cards that we read on the counter.
Got it. Thank you. We'll start. Okay, there are going to be a couple of cards that I'm going to send out. It's going to be the Sunsets counterplan, Advantage counterplan, Advantage 2, and then Advantage 1. Got it. Let me know whenever everyone's received the doc. Window. Okay. Everyone get the doc? Cool. All right. Everyone good? Participatory democracy outweighs directly resolve multiple converging existential threats, setting a global signal of democratic legitimacy and transparency necessary to broadly foster cooperation on transnational threats like emerging technology, pandemics, and climate change, and dampen the risk of conflict broadly by checking democratic backsliding, accessing the benefits of democratic peace theory. That's our Aiden and Side one evidence only the counterpoint solves are vitalizing a model of democratic lawmaking that independently turns advantage to effective cooperation on renewables and sustainable development goals, and port security demands a strong multilateral framework of democracy, which the counterpoint is necessary to reinvigorate this first and Weller evidence independently. The counterpoint solves the whole case. It results in the same prohibition on anti-competitive shipping conduct as the act results in the same removal of the shipping exemption. It really has Congress schedule a vote on the exemption rather than mandating that it is removed immediately, which is both the locus of our competition arguments below and demonstrates solvency because they have not contested that Congress would vote to sunset the provision, which means that it's just a question of that debate below. For the first argument was no spillover. They dropped that our 1 and C evidence is explicit on spillover, which was made explicit in the 1 and R. Weller evidence says, quote, one instance can move the needle and, quote, will strengthen the democratic branches of the government themselves. 2, also dropped the explicit 1 and C argument that 2AC analytics and the 1AR extension of this argument was an unwarranted assertion. Saying the word Guantanamo does not meaningfully reduce the risk of the net benefit does not constitute a complete argument. We did read an explicit solvency mechanism for the net benefit. They have no evidence to refute, even if you are skeptical of spillover. If there is some internal defense, at best, to a huge and drop internal impact, which he says try or die for the counterpoint sunsets, reinvigorate congressional oversight and enforcement agencies, key to democracy, antitrust, first and Waller 13, the democratic wall, antitrust professionals, bill scare Congress away, national districts more interest further combated by the tendency to ignore Congress, financial failure response to the court confers the history's view, exemptions to mediation, retrofitted includes separation, the Congress required to take some action to preserve the status quo, the recommendation that Congress should just focus on major issues, particularly critical reinvigorating Congress's role in antitrust remains the only democratically accountable branch of government. Using the plan's exemption as a guinea pig for sunsets, greenlights applications, for future applications, Resolvia 9, some special interest groups will carry a favor of legislation, radical legislation, help the few while harming the many. People seeking immunity should have the radio sugars and accessible immunity circuit for they should future sunset separations as any facility intelligent informed periodic review. Poll speakers are position make informed judgment regarding merits. Poll speakers should respond upon shared practices and generic authorization behave independently. It's key to democratic deliberation and rule of law. Fin and 10 terms of cause to improve legislative oversight. The impetus was to improve democratic accountability, sets of cause to improve public policy, and increase opportunities for legislative decision making, sets of cause to improve oversight, sense of policy innovation by creating sets of policy implementation assessment. Their information distributive advantages, legislation provides windows opportunity and more greater information distributing the decision cost to lane cost to another time. The certainty deficit, each one response to 1 and R made was dropped. 1, the counterpoint is a certain outcome results in the removal of the exception 3 months later than the plan. Even though the process takes longer, the counterpoint still reaches the same outcome as a probabilistic outcome of the counterpoint's mandate, which is sufficient to resolve the case, and they did not extend an impact to delay that was tied to an impact on the 1AC. 2, no impact of certainty. It is a nebulous word not tied to a 1AC internal link, not associated with impact on the 1AR. All of their advantages simply depend on the ability to bring suits after the removal of the exemption, what the counterpoint clearly does, because they have conceded that Congress would vote to remove the exemption when that vote comes up in front of Congress. 3, also links to them. The endless DOJ litigation would last years and take forever to regulate shipping companies, which would generate uncertainty. 4, drop there is no capture. Evidence from February says the plan is popular, which means lobbyists in Congress would be in support of removing the plan's exemption. Even if they win capture, they have not contested the counterpoint results in the removal of an exemption in a vote by Congress, so there is no impact to this. Now, the intrinsic perm. 1, there was no text for this perm anywhere in the debate. You should reject it. It was 5 seconds long in the 1AR. It was not a complete argument. They just asserted the perm is intrinsic and it solved the net benefit. No explanation of what the perm is, why the perm is intrinsic, how the intrinsic part solves the net benefit, what the intrinsic part of the perm is. The 2AR does not get to blow this up because the 1AR said two things. The 1AR did not answer. One, democracy and external DA to the AF. The AF forecloses the opportunity to do sunset review over the shipping exemption. The plan is actively bad for democracy. This is external net benefit because it prevents democratic review over the shipping exemption and removes it altogether, which means it links to the net benefit. It crushes the signal of participatory democracy. Two, there's no justification for functional intrinsic dissent anywhere in the debate. The 1AR explicitly said that this model would destroy the debate. There's no model of competition established in the 1AR. No answer to their argument that they do not have a check on infinite intrinsicness. They do not have a model of functional or textual competition. They just said the perm was intrinsic and moved on. They've dropped two reasons why that's bad. One, scrambled perms. Their model justifies perms that take words and splice them together in the 2AC to generate something totally intended by the plan, or the counterplan to generate new sources of intrinsic offense, allowing functional intrinsic justified a slew of perms, allow perms to do the opposite of the plan, or additions of elements that are neither in the plan nor the counterplan because they do not have a check on when something is sufficiently intrinsic. Two, textual competition is bad. A, sophistry. Plan text or policy shorthand, not an exact description of implementation, virtually synonymous. Plan text whose wording reflects strategic choice more than any coherent metric for competition. B, it's logical. They are guaranteed ground due to functional competition, so they do not need intrinsic perms in order to beat this because they do not meet their own interpretation either. They said they get counterplans. They get this perm against counterplans of internal net benefits. They've dropped that this counterplan net benefit is externals. They DA to the AF. You're saying the AF is actively bad for democracy. Perm to the counterplan, also 5 seconds long in the 1AR. Not really an argument. The frame for this and the reason why we are going for this counterplan is that Cal has no answer to 1R1 on perm to the counterplan. That this counterplan cannot and does not fiat the plan. This no links all of their competition arguments, indicting certainty and immediacy because the counterplan is not just an uncertain application of the plan. There is no way that the counterplan can fiat the plan's mandate. All the counterplan does is have Congress schedule a vote in 3 months reviewing the shipping exemption. That is the process of sunsetting that our evidence describes. It does not actually mandate that Congress does anything to vote to take the exemption off the books. It literally just schedules the session of Congress in which they are voting to sunset the provision. Whether or not Congress votes to actually sunset the provision is a question of solvency for the counterplan and also the genesis of all the AF deficits they could have made against this counterplan, but the 2EC failed to capitalize on that, which is why we are going for it, which means we do not justify broadly competition off of certainty immediacy because in no instance do we fiat the plan. They've also dropped an independent policy modification argument. The counterplan has Congress and the Sunset Commission revise the plan to mitigate, to change it and mitigate the scope of the exemption, which definitionally yields a different policy than the plan, which is something that is functionally distinct. Also, they've conceded that our definitions of should, resolve, substantial, etc., all imply certainty immediacy. Alternate interpretation to fiat erode dead ground because it enables the AF to no link DSADs like politics and AFGAN because it renders certain conventional rollback and unanswerable. They didn't make a distinction between normal means for competition and DAs in the 1AR, so the 2AR is too late because the 1AR simply just read these cards and moved on without answering any part of the competition arguments. Advantage counterpoint can see the perm not going for it. Ports advantage, the no external port infrastructure impact with streambook cards. Word salad does not make an argument, does not access a clear extinction scenario. Just as people rely on ports to get necessities does not mean everyone to go extinct because supply chains are a little more volatile. Advantage one, no impact to LNG. Clark says it's technically impossible to ignite it on fire. Even if it did occur, the lateral force of the explosion be contained. Saying Giga 4 fighter is also impossible because it would require an instrumental amount of the explosives time to transport the material and expertise to place the bombs. And all of our arguments also say no impact to the economy.
We're going to start at 2:20. What was the, Tyler, what was the argument you made on the ports advantage?
Sorry?
What was the argument you made on the ports advantage?
Just no port infrastructure impact.
Okay. The order is going to be advantage 2, and then the counterplan. Right. Is anyone not ready? Cool. Actually, I wasn't looking at people. If anyone is not ready, please let me know verbally. All right. Massive risk of a poor innovation impact, which should outweigh the counterplan that has no explanation of how they spill over to global democracies. That poor innovation is important for climate adaptation and solves local renewables and sea rise. Failure of poor infrastructure causes extinction from climate wars, instability, and conflict between developing states from resource collapse that escalate. Only poor innovation spills over to broader efficacies that result in ports being able to stop the negative effects of climate change, like sea level rise, and be able to innovate to solve the downsides and effectively adapt to climate change, which results in better resources access getting to countries and supply chains in a lot of countries that, like in East Asian island states, that lead to resource wars. This impact is huge. Mutombo evidence is really good. They only extended their one-liner, but they didn't answer the impact. No impact is a shittily extended the shittily extension that continues to drop every single deficit. Mutombo says that there's a very clear existential line in the middle. Pull up in the card for you. It says that strengthening the logistic change is necessary to human survival. Otherwise, deteriorate supply chain effects guarantee resource complexes because food and water never gets to people. So certainty is the durability of their ability to innovate is necessary. The advantage counterplan in the 2AC card is really good, and this is the way out if you have doubts on the counterplan competition. But it's a really clear out on the deficit, the counterplan. The counterplan can't guarantee certainty. Only for terminally removing the exemption gives companies and private equity investors a go-ahead on long-term poor innovation in projects. The Barnard card was extended to 1 year, as well as a line about how it will take projects are 30 years long. Only a 5-year removal and the potential for removal will not cause the investment certainty that's crucial. Fear of competition distortion is the largest positive investment in the status quo, because alliances will flip between over and under capacity and to competitively use monopsony, bargaining leverage, the power leverage to pull port rates down to women. Consolidation means force have single points of failure that cut off investment at any time. That's Barnard, Merck, the long-term that got private investment necessary to make crucial safety improvements that capture. The 2AC card is really good, as well as the 1AC card, the brown card about capture, which proves that the companies will think that the counterplan will inevitably be captured by broader shipping companies, because it's inevitably it's been the way that shipping exemptions have occurred all the way. That's the way that shipping exemptions have stayed true all the way through our history, is mass political pressure from shipping companies. The counterplan, the common evidence in 2AC was really good. They'll find ways to solidify super competitive pricing for privacy, pricing forever. They have time to figure out how to hide their collusion forever in the time, and there's some sort of potential for a time frame differential that can magnify the anti-competitive effects. The F solved. The one is the counterplan isn't the same outcome. Capture that was done above. 2 is delay. Delay potentially kills growth, and 3 is the removal of the exemption isn't possible. The counterplan doesn't necessarily result in the full removal, and there's some chance of uncertain application, which the companies already perceive, which massively decreases private investment and doesn't solve the net benefit. It's a joke. They've conceded they don't have a single card that says that it spills over to global democracy promotion. No countries make decisions on whether or not to democratize based on U.S. antitrust exemption duration, and at best they inject a bit more democratic participation on one issue in antitrust, even if it spills over to broader democratic participation across the U.S. government. Other issues, thumping, Guantanamo, voter rights, gerrymandering, ineffectiveness, democracy promotion, all have a bigger cause of it. Every 2 in our card just says the results in better U.S. democracy, but no evidence says that that's solves the terminal impact. It's all about global democracy promotion and global spillover of economic cooperation, which is crucial. There's no terminal to the benefit. And also, obviously, all causes massively overdetermined. When they don't have a good piece of defense on the certainty advantage, we have a 100% chance of a certainty impact. Means that any chance of a solvency deficit means you have to vote affirmative. The intrinsic firm, they've conceded it solves best net benefit. It says the intrinsic firm from the 2AC was
was, it might seem late, but it was great. It was not properly answered in the block until the timer went off. We extended it, and reason to prefer in the 2C was perm, do the plan, and do the counter plan for antitrust immunities in the text of the 2C, and that obviously solves. There's no one in our answer to it. It uses other resolutional exemptions through the counter plan process, which means it'll allow for the other resolutional process, other exemptions to be done through the process of the counter plan. The topical intrinsic is good. They've conceded every reason. It forces the neg to have a specific reason why the topical or the plan is bad. They could beat the perm if they had either, but doing not doing it means the app can't even defend the whole resolution against contrived process counterplans that don't test whether apps are a good idea. Force us to prepare for infinite use process X to expand the law counterplans with artificial net benefits. App burden should not be defending the plan / resolution or good ideas, not random neg processes or bad ideas. Every 2 in our warrant for why to the answers to intrinsicness is new, so you should strike it off the flow. The 1AR extended all of them. Hold the line. This year already developed CIL, tort national security, OFAC, RICO, positive incentives, common law, NDT process innovation will blow app prep out of the water on already neglecting topic shifts away from deep clash over opportunity cost education, which is key to make better decision makers. The biggest terminal to debate solves their offense. App teams are limited to testing the artificiality net benefits within the resolution, which solves the whole infinite intrinsicness stuff. That means regs counterplan states with DAs about the plan and app being a bad idea are still fully possible as long as net benefit proves the plan or the resolution are bad. The neg wins the debate. The only differential is counterplans that don't test the resolution or the app. It expands the scope of antitrust over using sunsets. Functionally reduces the chance of a net benefit. Then the counterplans net benefit would test the opportunity cost, and the neg would be the permanent win. The justifies intrinsicness stuff. It's textually taking less of the counterplan, so it's predictable, and the perm is limited to the resolution. Takes neg ground, does not take neg ground. Topical intrinsicness can't solve any net benefit that proves the plan itself is a bad idea, and it's not arbitrary. It's based on words of the counterplan and the resolution. The 2 hours way too late on this. It was on the 2AC and in 2 places on the CIL counterplan. They didn't answer it in the 1 hour. The timer went off before they got to any reason, and it's a reason to whatever. We're gonna get going.
Good debate.
Good debate.
Good debate. Good debate.
Hey, Ian, this is Adrian. I need to know what the situation is here.
I'm voting now.
Okay, thank you.
All right, we're all in. Everyone good? Is that a yes? Got everybody? Sick. All right. Congratulations, everybody. This is a really interesting debate, a real doozy, I think, for everybody to decide. And I think everyone debated excellently. The decision is a 2-1 for the affirmative from Berkeley. I ended up sitting, and I'm not surprised. I literally typed out like my entire F ballot, really thinking I was just going to vote F on the risk of a solvency deficit. And I think the thing that held me up ultimately was just like, I'm kind of, while the F is doing narratively okay on the question of like whether or not the certainty solvency deficit is true, I'm just like struggling to understand how that's borne out by the pieces of evidence you read. Whereas I do understand the capacity for the counterplan to just overcome those uncertainties. So basically, I think there's not really a risk of a substantial solvency deficit, but there is some risk that the F is able to sort of trigger this DA and overcome some of the thumper arguments you're going for, which means that there's a slightly, basically net 1% risk of the net benefit and a slightly lower risk of the solvency deficit. The thing I was just going to vote on is just like narratively, I think you're fair doing well on the solvency deficit. I think like maybe that would be true, but again, it's basically just came down to my reading of the evidence in that case and just like the debating being vague and also kind of late breaking. I think that the neg card says that the counterplan is popular and asserts that it's similarly popular, but like I get the F's kind of pitch here that like shipping companies might not be confident in this in the long term, given like review cycles happening in the long term, whatever. But it's just like this card is just like people fear anti-competitive practices, which seems like something logically the counterplan would resolve. It's not necessarily in the context of the way the counterplan functions. But again, and so it is a bit of a snapshot, but again, it's like it establishes a narrative that contravenes the AFS narrative. The net benefit, I think I agree that the 2NR spillover cards are unjustified because I think the 2AC says no spillover, but the one and like the 2AC says spillover, the 1NR says basically nothing. It just kind of extends the Waller card, and the 2NR stands up and reads 3 more cards. And to me, it's like, no, you can't do that. You should have read those in the 1NR. But I do think that the obvious, like, you know, I think I'd read the 1NC Waller cards. They established that the F is, or that they're sort of something that reinvigorates institutions via the counterplan. But because of your debating on the permutation, I think that it actually kind of requires the negative to win that the counterplan overcomes thumpers, which the sort of debating for the 1NR is like too little on, and the 2NR literally is just like, actually it's external, which means obviously, like logically, that means that like the thumpers would have to, like the burden on the counterplan is then to like totally overcome the risk that the F kills democracy, which basically the 2NR saying the F kills democracy means that the thumpers sort of like present logical problems, which I think is generally true. It means that the risk of the DA is basically 0, but it does not mean that it doesn't really get at the question of like whether or not the counterplan is able to solve. And I think just like the fact that I think the counterplan net solves means that I lean towards that. But I think like literally it was a toss up. Originally, I spent the entire decision time thinking, actually, I think that the thumpers thing is just more important and presents a logical problem, and there's a narrative problem for the F. But I ended up concluding other way based on just like reading of the evidence as opposed to the narrative thing. The intrinsic perm, I think the 2NR does say that the F still links to the DA by preventing the dem review, which the 2AR kind of drops. And I think the reference, that's like a reference to all of the perm do both answers, which demonstrate that. And the issue for me here is that the 2NR goes for AF still uniquely links, and it is bad for democracy because it prevents dem review, which if it's true, demonstrates the thumpers thing. I said that earlier. But it's hard to resolve this because the 1NR and 1NR on intrinsicness are both like super fuzzy. I think like all I have the F saying is that there's lots of other counterplans they could read. All I have from the 1NR is that it allows them to add infinite new stuff, which makes counterplans landmines. Extrapolations of this in both final rebuttals are like enormous and substantial and make it very challenging to establish sufficiently that intrinsic permutations are like a thing and that I should just reject the counterplan on as a whole. Basically, I should just like view the counterplan as illegitimate and just kind of like perm it out of existence. And my general problem with the F debating here is that intrinsicness good isn't matched by a theory argument about why this particular counterplan or method is bad, while the neg is clearly defending its use in
the sense that it's saying the DA is actually external, which even though it demonstrates the higher threshold to the thumper argument, it also demonstrates that there's a theoretical or like logical reason why this might be a useful debate, because it's not the same thing your evidence is describing, or that your description of like theory stuff is describing. It's not just all the other counterplans, it's a little different. I think that if you spend more time characterizing the counterplan as arbitrary in some way, that I could easily be persuaded that intrinsicness is justified in this instance, but the neg got ahead of you there. And I think it's, if the AF is true that the net benefit is external, then like really what this intrinsic perm does say, slash, you know, if it, I guess what I'm saying is if I think it is true that the net benefit is external, then really what this intrinsic perm does is actually say that broadly there are no counterplan disad strats, logically, I suppose, which may be worse than negative and might kind of substantiate the way that they're characterizing intrinsicness bad. I do think the 2NR stuff on textual competition and sophistry is new. I also think that the scrambled permutations thing is really borderline. Like I see how it follows from the like add new stuff in the 1NR, add new stuff argument in the 1NR, but I also kind of let the F get away with similar extrapolation from like a shallow 1AR. So like it seems reciprocal to allow it in that case. I think it's the stuff at the bottom about how the perm is limited to the resolution and like some stuff about how it proves arbitrariness or whatever. I just was confused by that. I think if you wanted me to win the ballot on that, you need just like a clear or just like longer explanation of how that worked, or just to like narrow it down, like pick just the solvency deficit or the intrinsic perm. Cause like maybe I think that alone would have been sufficient for me to just like pick one and think about it in more detail. As it was, I was like, based on decision time, like I spent as much time reading and thinking as I possibly could. And like, it came out this way, but like more or less time changes those considerations. Gates defense is last, not really great, but it, I guess, like sort of met, like the F, like sort of met the threshold of like, maybe it's, you know, there's some risk of it, whatever. I think like the problem is more the counterplan solvency angle. Again, had it been a question where I thought there was more risk of a solvency deficit, I would have voted on like there is a risk of the case. Like obviously there's like a relatively decent risk of that being true. I think like the evidence aligns with your characterization more than theirs in general, or like the ask characterization more than the negs. My only piece of neg advice is, which is sort of separate to this, is like, I think the way to solve this really for 1AR is just to like, you could have spent less time on DDEV, because the 1NC reads a tech good DA, and then you can see the impact to tech good, and then they go for DDEV and read 3 minutes of tech bad. Like that could have really consolidated your DDEV debating a little bit, IMO. Then you could have spent more time kind of clearly establishing this counterplan. I think it like is a serious threat to DDEV, and I think you underexploited it in some ways by just being like reading more sustainability cards. But I think like if you just go all in on a few pieces of offense like that, and then just like read a few sustainability cards and like a few more transition cards, you could have cut some of the time from DDEV and had a little more like clear lines of reasoning on the counterplan that made it easier for me later to like tie stuff back, if that makes sense. Be more sympathetic to your position generally. That all those little things would have on their own probably been more than sufficient for me to vote F. Like I said, I came so close, but that was just how it shook out.
Can you all hear me? Is my audio coming through okay? Awesome. Sort of the inverse to Ian, I like had a neg ballot ready to go and thought for a while that I was going to vote negative, and then just sort of through my decision process ended up voting F. I think that there is an impact to the certainty deficit to the counterplan, and I think it is substantiated by 1AC evidence, but similar to what Ian said, I think that the narrative that the AF is spinning is quite good. And I think there's certainly a tangible impact to it. I think that the block and the 2NR are pretty shallow on the impact on the case debating, and sort of a meta comment, generally both sides are not in ideal spots negating their opponent's impacts. But I think that you're wrong, that their evidence is like just word salad, doesn't say anything. And I think the storytelling plus the logic sort of in my mind about how port infrastructure being totally messed up is pretty important for all their internal links is pretty good. I do think that their analytic presses on your impact are ultimately more convincing than your presses on their impact, given the quality of their internal link compared to your internal link. Ultimately, I think that both sides had like very minuscule offense. Like this debate was super close, but it's like I'm voting on like 0.5% versus like 0.4%. It was like super defensive oriented. The intrinsic perm gave me a little bit of pause. I think I was more sympathetic to the AF than Ian was, but I can sort of shelve that decision because I still think that the solvency deficit to the counterplan outweighs the net benefit to the counterplan independent of the intrinsic perm. But I guess I'll just talk about it now. I did end up giving the AF the intrinsic perm. I have it in the 2AC. It was clear to me that that was the perm they were extending in the 1AR. I think that you missed their distinctions about the intrinsicness not just being intrinsicness good, but topical intrinsicness good, which intuitively to me seems kind of arbitrary, but you're not really pointing out why that is the case in any neg speech. I think that the AF has offense based on why forcing neg, the neg defined a counterplan that competes with the resolution rather than just the AF is good, and the neg's offense is predicated off of something that is in contention with the resolution and not just sort of artificially competitive based on the process of the app. I think that that ultimately boils down to just like process counterplans bad in my mind, which they explain as sort of an app ground argument, which I'm somewhat compelled by. And then your arguments about scramble perms, I think the breadth of those perms are constrained by the intrinsic perms having to be tethered to the resolution. So while I get that there's some offense you have on reacting to scramble perms, I think that that offense is constrained by their sort of technical interpretation. And I also think that, well, I guess I'll just move on from that. I think that there is a disadd to the intrinsic perm. I think that Waller is like every instance matters. At first, I thought that that was introduced for you to be like, well, the counterplan overcomes all past instances of not using sunset clauses. But then reading your evidence, I was like, huh. Like it also makes the claim that sort of the reverse claim, which is why you were saying that the disadd is sort of external to the resolution, that the plan by not using sunset is alone bad. But then you have this piece of evidence that you introduced that's like, it cites a June example, and it's like we need to reverse the past examples of not using the sunset clauses. Here was an antitrust bill that was explicitly anti-democratic. So then it sort of makes me think, well, we have this process that uniquely right now is anti-democratic. The AF or the counterplan and the perm are net more democratic than the SQO, but that the distinction is very marginal for me. So I'm like, you know, the real impact on like global democracy from the counterplan and then the counterplan versus the AF or perm is like very minuscule to me. And I think that coupled with them just sort of pressing on like, I don't really understand how domestic antitrust democracy spills over to this like global democratic backsliding impact is pretty compelling to me, because I do think you have really good evidence about sort of spillover, one shot being sufficient in terms of changing the domestic, I'm fumbling my words, but like it makes domestic democracy around antitrust policy better, but the connection between that and your impact is a little bit tenuous to me. And I think I sort of end up siding with the app that I don't give you just like full risk of a huge connection to a disadd for that reason.
Yeah, so to debate pretty similarly, I honestly think that there's a good chance that I vote negative if instead of reading a bunch more cards for the internal link, you just explained more of what the original evidence that you've read says, and just like draw a line between the anti-democratic process of the AF and like some either collapse of legitimacy of the process of the AF, which means that it doesn't solve as well, or any sort of like bullshit about like modeling, or they have just like kind of pressed you to say your evidence isn't very good. And I think that the kind of move to just read more evidence kind of just cedes the persuasiveness ground to the 2AR, which is like difficult place to be for the negative anyways. And I think that just like my ability to explain like the process of the counterplan is more democratic than the AF. The AF is an anti-democratic process because it exists in back rooms or whatever. Like all of that makes sense to me, but my ability to translate that into any sort of tangible impact is pretty difficult, which means that if I think that there's a risk of a solvency deficit to the counterplan, which I think given the way that you've explained your answers to perm to the counterplan is kind of baked into the counterplan, that there is, you know, some uncertainty both regards of how the counterplan is perceived and whether or not the counterplan results in the AF passage. I think that it's a lot easier to explain how the solvency deficit to the counterplan gets impacted out than saying like the counterplan is more democratic and therefore the AF is now responsible for like the collapse of global democracy or whatever. So like, I think that if there is just like more explanation by the end of the debate about why the process of being more democratic translates either into a legitimacy argument or American democracy uniquely being good argument, then I think maybe I would give the net benefit more weight. I agree that the intrinsicness stuff is a little bit more nuanced on the AF side than the negative is giving it legitimacy for. And I think that a lot of the 2NR dissadds to intrinsicness are like justifies these other bad types of intrinsic perms, which I think are largely resolved by the AF essentially saying they get to replan in the 2AC, which is probably something that you can read dissadds to as well. But I just think that like the risk of offense on both sides is like pretty low. And I just think that the AF is kind of more persuasive on the risk of the net benefit being lower than the risk of a solvency deficit.
Yeah, that all makes sense to me, kind of what I was going through when thinking about this counterplan. I guess my question is, do you think DDEV better 2NR here than counterplan?
I didn't spend a ton of time thinking about it, but just from vibes, yeah, I think so. Like just after the block, I was like, huh. And after the 1AR ended, I was like, I think DDEV would have been a fine choice.
I think you would have really been in trouble with this tech thing. I just don't understand why you get to read a bunch of tech bad cards after you read the tech solves extinction card. You know what I mean? Like that really, I don't know how I could look the F in the eyes and say that's fine. That would be the only thing. Other than that, like the rest of your GW debating is great. I think tech bad is good. I just think you shouldn't read the court clog. You shouldn't read that impact court clog. But because if the AF had made a big deal about it, I would definitely have immediately voted for it. Like you just don't get to do it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that makes sense. That's all the questions I had.
Thank you all so much. We have to get to the hotel like ASAP so we can get to the round 8 pairing, but I'll let you all know if I have questions. I was gonna ask more about the Purview to counterplan debate and that, like what that would have looked like, but I'll just email, unless I don't know. I mean, I'll probably be graduating and done with debate before I even think about this stuff. But thank you all.
Thank you.
Great job, everyone.
Debate.